Let's get started. We are in the book of Daniel. We are halfway through. All right, exciting. That's great. Okay, we're in the book of Daniel. We're in chapter 5. Last week we covered chapter 4. We are going to try to cover a whole chapter tonight. I know that's hard. I know we go long when I do that, but it's the only way we're going to make it through Daniel before next year. So hang with me. And because, like I said, because it's narrative, we can do that. We can move a little faster because it's a story. So we can cover a little bit more ground. If this was theological scriptures and texts and verses, we wouldn't do that. But because it's narrative, we can. So there you go. Okay, let's get caught up really quick. Daniel, last week, he basically led Nebuchadnezzar to Christ, didn't he? Remember that? We saw that radical humbling that the Lord did, and then how he responded, King Nebuchadnezzar, an evil, vile man. He responded, though, and he gave his life, essentially gave his life to Christ. Christ wasn't quite there just yet, but he gave his life over to God, and he changed. And so that's kind of where we're at with Daniel. And Daniel is still in captivity, okay? Daniel is about 80 years old now, okay? We have about a 36-year gap between chapter 4 and chapter 5. So a lot has happened. We'll talk about that in just a second. And we are going to see, if y'all remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the statue. Do y'all remember the statue from chapter 2? It had the head of gold and then the breastplate of silver. Okay, we are going to move tonight from the head of gold, the kingdom of Babylon, to the next kingdom, the silver breastplate. So that's what's happening. All that to be said, let's get started. Daniel chapter 5, verse number 1. Here we go. Let's do it. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Who in the world is Belshazzar? Anyone ask that question? If you've been moving through this, you're like, I thought we were talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Let me tell you. Nebuchadnezzar has died. He reigned for 43 years. He was humbled for 7 of those years, literally behaving like an animal. And then he came to the realization that God is king. He served out the remainder of his time, and he has since passed away. Now, this is happening in the white spaces. That means between the scriptures. So in the white spaces, this has taken place. What also has taken place is a list of king transitions. So let me go through them with you quickly. You may not want to write notes because I'm going to move fast, but you can go back and listen to the video and write these notes later. So Nebuchadnezzar died, and then came in Marduk, okay? And he became king for a whole whopping 2 years. And then he was assassinated by his brother-in-law. Look out. All right, he was assassinated by his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law became king. He served for 4 years, and then he died. When he died, the king was transitioned to the next in line. The next in line was his son. His son was only a child. He served for 9 months, and then he was beaten to death as a child. And this beaten to death, these guys had come together and said, we need to take him out so that the person we want to be king can be put in king. So they beat him to death. They killed him as a child. The king vacancy was now open because there was no one left in the royal line. So then inserts our main man, who we're going to learn a lot about, and his co-heir, and that is Nabonidus. Nabonidus was elected king by this little council of guys that had set up the takeover. They made him king, but the problem was he wasn't part of the royal line. So though he was king, he was a bit anxious because he was in fear that just like the 2 guys before him had died, one assassinated, one not, he was afraid that maybe he could be next. So to try to protect himself, he went back to try to connect to the royal line. So he married Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. He married her daughter and then adopted her son into his royal line. So essentially what he did is he married into the royal line as part of protection. If he's part of the royal line, maybe he wouldn't be killed. So he's doing all of this to kind of take care of himself. He moves in, and guess what? The son's name is Belshazzar. And Belshazzar, what he does is Nabonidus sets Belshazzar as the king of Babylon, and then Nabonidus takes off to another part of the world, brings the capital, literally says, okay, we're moving the capital from Babylon, we're moving it over here, I'm going to reign and control everything over here, and I'm going to leave my now adopted son, Belshazzar, to rule in Babylon as the king. All of that has happened to get us to verse 1 in chapter 5, King Belshazzar. Now understand why this happened. all of this is important. We'll get back to Nabonidus in a few minutes. There's a lot of names, so listen, when I butcher them, just smile and go, I would do the same thing, okay? All right, let's keep going. So here we go, verse 1. Read it again. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. What is happening right now is that the Medo-Persian Empire is slowly moving toward Babylon. Remember, that's the silver breastplate, right? They're the next kingdom that will rule. They are slowly moving upon Babylon. What they've done is they have conquered all of the outer cities, but they haven't got to Babylon yet. They have even taken out Nabonidus. They have captured him and all of his men, and eventually they kill him. So they are slowly moving in the middle of this attack that's been happening for roughly 2 to 4 months. We don't know. Historians argue, and I don't want to bother with it. So somewhere in that range, this has been going on. So the point is, it's not like it happened yesterday, he didn't know. For a couple of months, he has been watching this develop. This great empire is moving in to conquer him, but he is having a feast. I'll just leave it at that. Let's keep going. It says he has a feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of 1,000. This was actually a small size. How many of you have ever had a party with 1,000 people? Nope, one? Okay, how'd that go? You were broke, huh? You're still in debt? A lot of credit cards. When you throw a party, for these guys to throw a party for a couple thousand people, that was kind of the norm. Isn't that crazy? Do you know what they would do to feed all of those people? They would kill roughly 1,000 animals to be able to feed all those people. Isn't that nuts? That's crazy, right? And all the animal lovers, I can't believe it, right? Cool, I can't believe it. How did they do it? He's throwing a party for 1,000 plus people. Now, let me tell you something. Why is this happening? Here's why. Because they thought they were invincible. See, Babylon was surrounded by a wall that was 87 feet thick. That's 8 basketball goals plus some put together in a wall. Okay? That's huge. And then it was 350 feet high. They thought they were invincible, kind of like the Titanic. How'd that go? Too old for y'all? Sorry. He thought he was invincible. He thought he was in control. And so Belshazzar, the great king, throws a party for 1,000 plus people. Here we go. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, he's getting drunk, basically, is what they're saying. As he tasted the wine, he commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple be brought in. Now, 2 things. One, we learned about this in chapter 1. When Babylon came and conquered Judah, they took those vessels. Do y'all remember this from week 1? Some of y'all that were here. They came in and they did 2 things. They took all of those hostages, which included Daniel. That's how he ended up in Babylon. But then they also came and they took all the vessels of their God. Remember the point. The point was, if I could walk in your temple and take the things of your God and he not do anything to me, that means that our gods are stronger than your gods, giving his people back home great confidence that they're following the right person. So he says, let's bring all of those out. But he says something interesting. He says, from my father Nebuchadnezzar. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of history here, a little bit of Greek. In the Greek language, there wasn't a word for grandfather. Okay, so they would say father or father, father's father. What he's referring to is his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, not his father. That was just a little extra. That was free, or you can pay me later. Okay, to be taken out of the temple in Jerusalem and be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines pause. You know what a concubine is? Okay, good. If you don't, ask the person next to you afterwards. The fact that it says concubines leads us to believe that there was quite possibly, now forgive me for being blunt here, but I want to be honest with you, and quite possibly that literally an orgy is taking place as they are gathered together. The fact that the wives and the concubines are all together leads us to the impression that they are having a party, and in the process, there's some kind of orgy happening, okay? Now, you got to understand, I know that's a little over the top, but you need to understand the context of what God's about to do. This is insane. They're in the middle of this wild party, okay? And so they bring all the vessels in so that they might drink of them. He says, bring all of those vessels from that temple that we captured long ago, bring them in, and we're going to use them. We're going to drink out of them. Can you talk about mocking God any worse than that? Right? I mean, we don't have really anything that would emphasize, but let's just imagine that they came into, I can't even match it up. We don't understand this because we don't have these kinds of things anymore, but just imagine the most sacred of holy of things being taken, and then they're taking it to their party, and they're going to use it to get drunk out of. Like, great, these guys are nuts, and they're about to get what's coming. Just wait. Now, I want to point something out to you, okay? I always want to try to be applicable as best as possible. I'm going to stretch this a little bit, but I want you to see something. Back in this time, okay, the temple, the vessel items, all of these things, these were very important because this was how they got to God. These things were how they honored God. The temple was how people communicated to God. And then Jesus came on the cross, and when he died on the cross, the veil was torn from what? Top to bottom, and basically what was happening is no longer was there a medium for humans to get to God. Because Jesus died on the cross, now we have instant access to God. So these vessels in our modern day culture, this is why we can't even give an illustration, they don't exist. You know what does exist? You. You are now the temple of God. Did you know that? When you became a Christian, you became the temple of God. Your body is a temple, or you could translate that even as a vessel. You are a temple, a vessel of God. You know what I want to say? Here's what I'm going to say. The world, just like this king and all of his crazy people threw a party and took advantage and mocked God with the vessels and the things they had taken, let me tell you something. The world has guided us to do the same thing with our bodies. If you are a temple of God, let me ask you a question. Don't answer, just think about it. Are you living like it? Do you take care of your body? That goes from what you eat, how you live, how you walk, the things you say, the things you do, even the way you dress. Are you living like a temple of God? Because let me tell you something. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit resides in you, and you are of same equivalence as a temple and a human body as the temple was back in the Old Testament. Don't miss that. And so here, the world, these people are taking God's vessels and they're mocking it. But let me tell you something. We are no different if we don't treat our bodies like temples of God because the Holy Spirit resides in it. Don't miss that. That may be the only thing you need to hear tonight for some of you. Do not miss that. Live a life that honors God. Be a temple worthy of praise. Okay, Daniel 5, verse 3. Let's keep going. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They actually did it. They're crazy. They drank wine and praised the gods of the gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. Notice it was just descending. They were saying, we'll drink from the highest of value all the way to the lowest of value. We're just going to mock you as much as we possibly can. All the way down to the bottom. I lost my spot. Okay. And then verse 5. Immediately, in the midst of their sin, and the midst of this orgy, most likely, and the midst of this wild party with thousands of people all together, mocking God, blaspheming God, doing whatever because they just don't care. In the middle of that, immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. Literally, a hand came out, pretend this is a plaster wall, and started writing on the wall. Just a hand. Addams Family. Y'all remember that? That's probably really old. I just thought of that, so that's really inappropriate. Forgive me. But just imagine that hand. And it comes out. That's really freaky. Let's stop. And it starts writing on the plaster wall. Now, just like some of you who kind of lost your breath for a second when you just heard that for the first time, imagine what that room did. Some of them probably passed out. It didn't say that, but I bet you that it happened. That room was silent. And it says in the issue, just a little side note, it says opposite of the lampstand. What would happen is the lampstand would always be off to the side, and it would be in a place where the king, who was most likely sitting elevated, just getting drunk like a loser. I mean, like a loser. The lampstand would be positioned so that the king could have the best lighting because he was the king, right? So he could see best. People could see him best because it was all about him as king. So now this is important because what would happen is as the lampstand was pointing this way toward the king, most likely it's written right, across from the lamp, that means that it was written most likely right above the king. Imagine that. You're getting drunk, elevated, looking at your 1,000 people who are looking at you, and all of a sudden, the Addams Family hand starts writing behind you. Watch what happens. Complete silence in there. I can't even imagine. How cool. Verse 6. Then the king's color changed, his face. And his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. He was so shocked, he just started shaking. I know y'all couldn't see that. It's for the better. He just started shaking, and his face went white as snow. It changed colors. If you're already white, I don't know what color it went to, but it changed colors. Maybe red. Knees knocked together, white as snow. Verse 7, the king called loudly. Listen to this. God, this bozo. I mean, these guys are just so. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. Did we not learn what happened with Nebuchadnezzar twice? He called for these wise men, and what could they never do? They could never interpret whatever it was that was happening. Fools seeking fools. And he does it again. He should have learned from before, but let's just keep going. He calls out to basically all of the wise men, and he says, come. And the king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing, because remember, there's now handwriting on the wall. The hand's most likely gone, but the handwriting's on the wall. I lost my place. Hold on. Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple. Now, clothed with purple means you were given royal. It was like that was a royal symbol. Color. By the way, the purple color, if you're wearing purple, that's the color of royalty back in the Old Testament. That's why Jesus had purple, and you see it on the cross. Now we celebrate Easter. So purple was of royalty. It would be given a cloth with purple. They would be made royalty. They would given a chain of gold around their neck. Gold was the highest monetary value. That was the most expensive thing that you could give someone. So you basically are going to become wealthy if you can interpret this, and you're going to get status. You're going to be like, you're going to wear purple. You're going to be of royalty. And then he says, so now I'll give you the necklace of gold, and then you shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now remember, his father who like bailed out and was over in right field, he was king 1. Belshazzar was king 2. He's saying this next guy, you would be the third king. You would come behind me. You would have the highest place, position that you could have. I'm going to offer all of these things to you if you can interpret the handwriting. Then verse 8. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Now, some people think they were partying too, and so they were drunk, and that's why they just couldn't read it. Others think that it just wasn't Paul. Like maybe it was curved too much or whatever. They simply couldn't understand. And most likely that's the second one because God's in control and he wanted Daniel to be able to interpret. But either way, here we are. They come in. They can't interpret. They can't understand. They can't read the writing. Then verse 9. Then the king, Belshazzar, in case you forgot his name, was greatly alarmed and his color changed and his lords were perplexed. See, he got his color back when his wise men came in because he thought, okay, my guys are going to be able to interpret this. We'll be able to make sense. And then they came in and they couldn't interpret and he went right back. White as snow or whatever color, and his knees knocking together. He's freaking out because he has no idea what happened. A hand just wrote on the wall. What do I do? Then the queen. This is referring to his mother. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, they were frantic. They were freaking out. Because of them freaking out, came into the banquet hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. She asked whoever spoke to the king, you always had to give your dues and honor him and whatever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, see how she's reminding him of what had happened before, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. What an introduction, huh? When mom comes in and says something like what do we all do when things go wrong? Why we cry to mom? She knew that. 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 What do we all do when things go wrong? Why we cry to mom? She knew that. We know it's his mom because if it was his wife, she would have been in the room with them. So we know it's his mom who wasn't in the room given the circumstances, obviously. His mom hears everybody's freaking out. All this crazy stuff's happening, so she comes in. And she speaks of Daniel in the most highest of ways. You got to imagine the impact Daniel must have had just on her as well back when this all happened the first time. Right? Everybody knew about Daniel. Everybody saw that he could interpret. There was something special about him. And the mom was still there. And the mom, remember, can I ask you something? Do people think and talk about you like she was about Daniel? I mean, think about that. Why was she speaking of Daniel like this? Because not only could he interpret, he was a man of God. Nebuchadnezzar said that. He was a man of God. For us, a man or a woman of God. Can I just ask you, when people speak of you, if I were to come into your workplace and say, hey, what do you think about Heath? Tell me about Heath. What's he like? Would they speak something, maybe not of this magnitude, but something like that? You know, one thing we know is that he loves the Lord, and he works hard. Do people speak of you like that? You don't have to be king or dream interpreter, but you should be living a life that when people think or speak about you, it can't be denied there's something different with you. There was something different with Daniel. He was a man of faith and a man of God. Just think about that. The queen comes in, this beautiful introduction of Daniel. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show you the interpretation. Isn't it funny how when the world goes bankrupt, all of a sudden they're willing to turn to God? Have you seen that, right? When everything's going down, well then, let's pray. We're out of everything else. Let's pray. Let me tell you something. That's kind of funny, and that's kind of like, yeah, that's the world. But let me tell you something. That's an incredible gift for us in ministry. Because the people around you, they may mock you for being a Christian. I hope they do, to be honest with you, because that means you're actually living it out so they know it. The people around you, they may mock you, they may make fun of you, they may kind of ignore you, they may never want to hang out with you. But let me tell you something. When they hit rock bottom and they know that you have stayed faithful to God your whole life, or at least as long as they've known you know what they'll do? They'll come to you. When they hit rock bottom, they'll come to the one thing they know that's true, and it's you. And you know what it is? It's God in you. And so we can laugh and make fun of the world, and it is funny, it's sad, but the truth is God ordains those things so that we can be there. Don't miss that. Please don't miss that. Those are opportunities. So she says, call on Daniel, and he'll show you the interpretation. And then verse 16, then Daniel was brought in before the king. Notice he was never hanging around with those fools, was he? He was never with the enchanters, the Chaldeans. He was always on his own. He knew that bad company leads to corruption, right? Some of us hang around with fools and we become a fool and we wonder why we became a fool. It's because we hung around fools. He was brought before the king. And the king answered and said to Daniel, you are the Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, remember, taken hostage, whom the king, my grandfather, my father, brought from Judah. I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you. Gosh, do people speak of you like that? And that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Oh, I hope someone says that to me one day. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and to make known to me its interpretations, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. Duh. Verse 16, but I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and you shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Isn't that our world? Man, if you'll do something for me, I'll take care of you. Man, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to give you a promotion. I'm going to give you all, just do this for me, right? It's all about status. It's all about that next thing. It's okay to improve. It's okay to get promotions. That's all okay, but don't get caught only pursuing that. That's not why you're here. Those are rewards for living a life of God. Those are for rewards of working hard because you want to honor the Lord, not because you care what your boss is going to do. But he says, here's what we'll give you. We'll give you this. We'll give you this. Then verse 17, then Daniel answered and said before the king, listen to this, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to, okay, that was probably harsh. He probably didn't say it like that. Let's back up. Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Now notice, unlike his mom, he didn't come in and say, oh, holy king, I bow down before you. No, he just says, listen, keep all your stuff for yourself. It was Daniel, so he wasn't disrespectful. I wanted him to be because it just makes it, like I just wanted to get him, but that's not what he did. But he said, I want you to keep all that. I don't need your rewards, but I'm going to go ahead and do this for you. I'm going to give you this interpretation. By the way, Daniel was bold, wasn't he? Remember as a teenager what he did? At 14, standing in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Do you remember that? Telling him that dream. Your kingdom's going to be crushed when Christ comes back. I mean, that's boldness. At 80 years old, he wasn't any less bold. Don't forget that. Right? Your boldness should increase as you get older, by the way. Just a thought. The writing's really small because there's so much to talk about. All right, just forgive me. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Then verse 18. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. Who gave it to him? God. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whomever he will. That's what we talked about last week. If you missed it, go listen to it. It's a great story about humility and being proud. 22. And you, his son, listen, the direct words, and you, his son, here's the explanation, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. He knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, yet he refused. Indictment 1. Verse 23, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them. Indictment 2, you blasphemed God, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which did not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose all your ways you have not honored. Indictment 3, you worshiped false gods. 3 indictments in one statement. Verse 24, then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing. Mene, mene. Mene means number. Tekel means weight. And parson means divide. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has balances and found wanting. What he says, when I look at you, when God looks at you in your kingdom, your spiritual value is not there. It's not there. Your morality. It's not, forgive me, back up, chill out. 26, Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. I'm sorry. Time is up is the first one. And then he says tekel. And tekel means weight. He says, when I look at you, the spiritual value is not there. Your morality is not there. When we balance it against God, it just doesn't work. The weight is off. And then the last one, Tarson. He says, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Remember, they were the next kingdom coming, and your kingdom will be split. He says, listen, in short, this is it. Your time is up. God has given you time. You have taken advantage of that time, and your time has come to an end. And then he says, wait. When I look at the weight of your kingdom, when I look at its spirituality, when I look at its morality, it doesn't weigh up. It doesn't balance out. It's done. And then the last one he says, and because of that, your kingdom, it's going to be divided. It's going to be divided, spread apart, essentially taken from you. Last part, verse 29. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. and it would be short-lived. Because, verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. History moved from the head of gold to the breastplate of silver in one swoop and one night. While Daniel spoke those words, the Medes and Persians were right outside the wall. There was a dam that ran under the wall to get water into the kingdom. They blocked the dam, waited for it to dry. They dug under it, and they literally walked right under the wall. They took out the first set of guards and then conquered the entire city in one night. As Daniel spoke those words, God moved it into existence. Now let me show you something. When God speaks, you will hear. What you do with it is up to you and I. But when God speaks, you will hear it. And it will be clear. Remember the lamp shining on the wall? It will be clear. The question is, what will you do with it? The kingdom fell apart for a multitude of things. We said this in week 1, and I'm going to say it again. Our nation, not kingdom, but our nation is not much different. The reason that Babylon finally fell, there were 7 things. Let me just go through these quickly. The first one was drunkenness. They were having a party. Can I tell you something? We have a culture that's drunk. Alcohol rules our country. Because they were drunk, the kingdom fell. The second was pleasure. They were having a wild party while their kingdom was literally getting ready to fall apart. Can I tell you something? We, as Americans, are living a party life. Maybe not even going out to actual parties, but even as Christians, we're living this party life, just living the dream. Man, we got money, we got nice houses, all is well. And guess what? The world is literally falling apart around us. But if we're not careful, we get so caught up in the pleasure that we miss what's actually happening. They were caught up in the pleasure. And then immorality. They were a sex-driven culture. All right? Wives and concubines, multiple of them. They had gods, that how they worshiped the gods was through acts of sex. Okay? Our culture, let's be honest, we're not much different. We're a sex-craved culture. That's the norm. If you date someone and you don't have sex, you're a weirdo. Our culture is following in the same suit. It could even be worse. Let's just be honest. It could be worse now than it was then. I don't even know. I don't even want to think about it. Then it was idolatry. They worshiped all the other gods but the one true God. And you know what? They worshiped other gods even when they knew what the one true God was capable of, didn't they? Guys, we have cults. We have false teachings. We have false churches. Guys, we got sports that might as well take the place of God. We have rock stars that take the place of God in most people's lives. Guys, we're not much different. They blasphemed God. Remember the vessels? They brought them in. They drank from them. This is your God? Hey, let's drink. Man, who cares? Pfft. Guys, we're not much different. Let me just tell you one little area. The things we say. Oh, God. Oh, God. Well, that's not a big deal, right? Who's God? It's God's fault that happened to you? Forgive me. We say, God damn. That's in natural language. God damn. You know what you're saying? You're damning God, who sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for you so that you could live. But damn him, right? Guys, we're not. Do you see how this is happening? Oh, but we don't think about these things, do we? We don't put these two together. But what are we doing? We're doing the very same things. We blaspheme God. They willfully rejected God. They knew what the God had done. They knew what God had done. They watched it happen with Nebuchadnezzar. They knew all the prophets that came. They knew, yet they still willfully rejected. We are still willfully rejecting the gospel. Because of technology, the gospel can spread farther and faster than ever in history, yet people still reject the gospel. Now listen, this isn't all indictment on us. This is just us as a people. Man, we still. Greed. Greed. He said, I'll give you all this if you'll interpret the dream. The American dream is greed. Big house, 2.5 kids, I don't know how that's possible. Big paycheck. Hot wife, hot husband, man, that's man, just give me more. That's the American dream, greed. Materialism. Power for them was in status and gold. Power for us is in money and status. You have a good job. If you're up here, you have this much money, man, you're good. Materialism. Confidence and security. They fell because they thought they were unbeatable. They had a party while they were being sieged because they were so cocky they thought it would all be okay. Can I tell you something? If, most likely when America falls, whatever that looks like, it most likely is going to happen silently from within. Last two. Corrupt leadership. Everybody was drunk, and when the nation needed them most, they were worthless. Now, I'm not saying our leaders in the country are drunk, but I'm telling you this, when our nation needs them most, a lot of them are being found worthless. Can I tell you something else? In church leadership, when the human people need good, godly men and women of God to step up and lead, many of them are letting us down as well. Corrupt leadership. And then the last one is one we focused on last week. It's pride. They didn't humble themselves. They sought their kingdom. Everything was about being in charge. They never changed. And even now, even Christians struggle with this, don't we? We get caught being proud. We get caught being boastful. Look at my ministry. Look at this. Look at my job. Look at my wife. Look at my... We're caught in this circle of pride. This is why they fell, and this is why we're not much different. The truth is, many of us are like Belshazzar. We're living a life. We're just partying it up. And it may not literally be alcohol and drugs, but we're living this life, and we're just partying it up, man. Just live, man, however it goes, whatever, man, just do it. Just do your thing, whatever you need to do, whatever you want to do, go for it. Listen. God sent Jesus to come on the cross to die for us because sin brings death. Sin brings death. And God knew that, and God wanted to save us, and so he sent Jesus to die on the cross for us so that all who choose to receive would not experience death, but would experience eternal life. And listen, when you become a Christian, I want you to hear this. We don't expect perfection. We can't. We never will. We'll never be perfect. We don't expect that. But here's what God expects, and here's what we expect. We expect that when you become a Christian, at that moment, your life would begin to change. That it wouldn't be, okay, I'm saved, all is good. No, it would be, now that I'm a Christian, this is the way that I'm going to live my life. These are the things that I'm going to pursue. I want to pursue God. I want to live a life that honors him. Never understanding I'm never going to be perfect, but knowing that this is what I need to do. Do you know why Christianity is becoming less and less valuable to people? It's because they look at Christians and they go, if that's how a Christian lives, they're not living how they say it's supposed to be done, so why would I want that? And that, guys, that's on us, right? Knowing we're not going to be perfect, but that's on us. God says, come to me, I'll make you clean. You don't have to do anything, but your response to me then is to go and live the life you can, pursuing after me the very best that you can. Never being perfect, but doing it the very best that you can, seeking after me. Guys, we for some, we're the reason why people look at Christianity and think it's a joke. Live for the Lord. And leaders, let me tell you this, and I'll be done. If you are a leader in any capacity, from maybe you just disciple someone one-on-one, you lead a small group, you teach a large group, whatever. If you're a leader, understand this. What your people need most is your personal holiness. What they need most is your personal holiness. When you have kids, what your kids will need most is your personal holiness. You see that? Just behaving is half of the battle. They need your personal holiness. I don't want you to settle. That's what I want to see. Man, this kingdom, they pursued all the things they wanted and it fell. Let me tell you something. Listen, please listen to me. I don't want you to settle. I want you to have a big vision. I want you to see what Christ did for you on the cross and say, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to give my all to this because I want to honor him. I want to think past my sin. I don't want to just try to not sin. I want to go and live for God. If you will do that, that's when God is able to just do incredible things. And that's when people will begin to look at Christians and go, you know what? I need that. When their world's falling apart, they'll go, I need that. I need what you have. Help me understand this. Walk me through this. I want this. Why? Because they see a life of faithfulness. Listen, when we walk out of this room, every Thursday night, when we're done, Satan should tremble when we walk out of the door because we are so filled up with the Spirit that we walk out of here and we don't go back to our cars and live the same way and do the same thing. No, we're so filled up that we go out and we live for God. And Satan knows that as soon as these guys, as soon as Underground gets through those doors, he's going to have a war on his hands. And this is why we come. This is why we're here. To get filled up with the Spirit so that we can go out and do ministry, so that we can go out and be the type of Christians that people see and go, I want that. Whatever you have, I want that. They fell because they willingly rejected God. If we learn nothing else, let's just see that. See what can happen. And the writing's on the wall. The warning's out there. What will you do with it? That's the question. Man, let's get fired up. And let's walk out there and not go do the same crap we keep doing. But let's walk out of there and say, I'm going to be different. And I want to make a difference. And I want Satan to tremble when I walk out of those doors because I live for Christ. And there's nothing that can get in the way of that. Man, oh, how powerful that would be if this army left and really lived for the Lord. Amen? That's what we need to do.